What's up, everyone? I've got a lot of stuff to go over. The live letter happened last night, the big boy live letter that everyone was excited for, with the battle system and job changes looked into a fair amount of detail, and I'm going to go over mainly the job changes that happened in the live letter in this video, as well as some personal thoughts about what I'd like to see, as there wasn't really much I didn't like seeing. The content looks very well done, and now I'm more excited for next month than ever. Just a little disclaimer before I start, surprise surprise, I was not invited to the media event and therefore do not have any experience with playing any of these classes. This is purely from what I heard from the live letter and my speculations around it. So first off, some general changes. Job synergies are being nerfed in order to make roles viable for quote-unquote meta roles. For what it seems, they're trying to close the gap in between classes utility and DPS in order to try and eliminate an optimal party composition. Will it work? It's high hopes that it will, but we'll have to see when it plays out. For example, starting with tanks. All tank jobs should work as main or off-tank roles, whereas now you usually have the main tank hierarchy. Now all four are supposedly viable in each role. All tanks will have 3 certain guaranteed actions: a defense buff for yourself, a defense buff for your party members, and an off-tank support for the main tank. Offensive stances have been completely removed. That includes Sword Oath, Darkside, and Deliverance. The only effect of your tank stance is now that it generates enmity with no disadvantages. Your tank mastery trait is added to take up 20% damage reduction as well as health and damage bonus based on your attributes, and that is given to you at any tank class starting at level 1. For healers, there's not much to get into other than they're trying to make a purely more focused healing role despite what you may feel. Protect is now completely removed from the game, so you do not have to worry about proccing it anymore. There are also new actions that are focused on balancing the healer's actions and abilities so that anyone is viable as well. For the DPS, there is not much to look into as well. A lot of them did not change much, as well as they're just expanded and evolved upon. They're looking at more traditional design and mechanics, and every job is getting an AoE whether or not they had it before. So we're going to start off with Gunbreaker, as Gunbreaker was one of the classes they went into a little bit more in depth, and it is one of the new classes that a lot was talked about. Their main mechanic seems to be based around different charged cartridges, and whenever you pull a trigger with a weapon skill, it will enhance its effect. The 3 tiers will accumulate as you fill up your cartridge: ready to rip, ready to tear, and ready to gouge. There are status effects granted to you with each cartridge. Super Bolide is the job's new immunity, which will shoot your health down to 1 and render you immune to most attacks. Another skill that we're looking at is Aurora, and it is essentially a regen that can be placed on yourself and, given by its description, presumably others. There were a couple of others we didn't exactly see but were shown very briefly in the stream, such as Bloodfest, which is a move that grants 2 cartridges in your gauge, Nebula, which is your average 30% damage reduction cooldown, Rough Divide, a jumping attack, and Wicked Talon, which seems to be part of a combo involving the 3 tiers. Overall, Gunbreaker looks pretty refreshing, and hopefully with the new tank systems it will be a good addition to the roster. Next they showed off Bard, which presumably has a few changes. It was mentioned that mostly just addressed some issues. With the crit hit rate increased from songs no longer in effect, that is a big change, as that means that the Bard now has either completely different mechanics or songs were removed. We know that the Job Actions trailer right here proves that Armies Pay On is still a thing in one way or another, and Pitch Perfect is still around as well, but no word on Mage's Ballad yet. At higher levels, the Soul Voice gauge is unlocked, allowing for powerful actions. As a former Bard main myself back in Heavensward in the beginning of Stormblood, I'm curious to see what happens here, and I'm not personally too distraught yelling "Rest in Peace, Bard." Next on our list is Dragoon. That won't really be missed. It is said that the conditions which Mirage Dive has to be activated has been revised in a way, although I'm not too sure which way that is, so I guess we'll have to see. Dragoon, among many other DPS classes I will be covering, did not go through many changes, however they were just added upon. All I have to say is that the final jump that was released in this job action trailer looks really cool. But other than that, there's not much to say about it until you play it yourself. If you play the class yourself, you will not notice much difference, and it will be mostly the same as you know it now. Black Mage. They surprisingly released a fair amount of information on Black Mage, even though the job itself is mostly unchanged. One new mechanic is Umbral Soul, which grants you 3 Umbral Ice and 1 Umbral Heart. Using the move in Ice Stance grants you stacks, which is meant to keep up stacks when enemies leave the battlefield or when you're moving between trash mobs in dungeons or raids. The new tier of magic added, and the duration of Astral Fire that is active has been completely increased. There are also now more instant casts that were added, and we got a little sneak peek at some of them. Xenoglossy, an instant cast with a 750 potency while under the Polyglot effect, and Despair, which has been described as a flare for single targets. Speaking of Polyglot, Polyglot now has 2 stacks if Enochian is kept up for a full minute. Unfortunately, however, and this goes for all casters, mana shift has been completely removed, meaning healers no longer have that support. Overall, however, the class seems to be centered around more explosions, which is exactly more of what it used to always be. Astral Ojen. This class has been given a little change in appearance and performability, and since it's usually my go-to healer, I'm naturally curious. Cards have been drastically changed, and what that means is each of the card's effects has been adjusted to provide a DPS buff of some sort, and whether or not that is on top of another effect, I'm not sure. But what is also mentioned, that you still have to give certain cards to certain party members. The draw and play recast timers have been separated, so you can recharge your draw time as you hold a card. And the stances have been adjusted at higher levels, as you now have an action that will grant the ability to swap between stances for a given time. It seems to me that they took everything that made Astro good and tweaked it to make it even more utilized. With the battle system undergoing certain changes and the healers meant to be more balanced, it only makes sense to do some of these changes to the Astral Ojen. For example, with TP no longer being a thing, the Spire would have had to have had some change, and I'm assuming that the other cards all having some sort of DPS focus has something to do with that as well. I'm really liking the new look of the gauge, the new look of some of the moves, and what appears to be a solar system that surrounds you as you are in a certain phase of your rotation or your stance or whatever, so we'll see where this goes. Next up is the Samurai. Not much has changed for this class either. Hagakure was revised to activate Midgare Satsuruga more effectively, and for those who have no idea what I'm saying, essentially that Big Bang Blow is now more effective when used with the right actions. Overall, I don't have much to say about Samurai, except that its utility that we all know of is being taken out of the game since the slashing debuff is no longer existent, along with the piercing and blunt debuffs that the Monk and the Dragoon and the other classes have. So maybe that there will be something added that makes the Samurai something other than the 100% pure DPS, or maybe they'll double down and buff the crap out of everything like they seem to do a lot in the previous patches. We'll just have to wait and see. Okay, so next on the list will be Warrior. This is the tank that has seemed to have changed the least. Deliverance is gone, as well as the other tank stances, and a new buff applied that when utilized properly, a certain action will become available where the potency will be more than a Fell Cleave, making it the most powerful action with all the tank rolls. Of course, Inner Release and Fell Cleaves are still going to be there, but there's now other options for how to utilize the raw power of Warrior. To be completely honest, Warrior was the tank that I've played the least so far, so I can't speak much on how excited I am. But it looks pretty similar to what I've known from the past, and I'm sure that if you are Warrior now, you're going to enjoy it in the future. Moving on to Red Mage. Red Mage has a couple of new moves to add to his repertoire, including a new instant cast, Engagement, which shares recast timer with Displacement, and Reprise, a move that will have a base potency of 100, but can be upgraded to Enhanced Reprise when mana of both types is above 10. Other than these new moves, I didn't notice much new information revealed about Red Mage. It looks like the same simple class that we always know. The Varazes are still there and still work the same from what I assume, so I guess there's your core mechanic that's untouched. And everything else looks to be even more red. I don't know how else to say it. There's nothing too drastic that changed here. It just looks like it's the plain old Red Mage that we all know and love. Monk. The biggest change revealed so far is that Grease Lightning has been given a 4th stack. An action is required to unlock the 4th stack, but once again it will improve your speed and therefore your overall DPS. There's also an action that will allow you to maintain that charge. Overall, there's nothing huge, nothing new to really talk about apart from the fact that and a few new flashy looking moves, so go nuts. Paladin is the next tank we'll be taking a look at, and the first thing that we will see is a gap closer. It has officially been implemented. Paladin has finally graduated high school. With the gap closer in, however, Sword Oath, like other DPS stances, are out. An interesting new mechanic is that Riot Blade now grants the effect where cast times are eliminated for certain abilities such as Clemency and Holy Spirit, etc. This can really up the utility for Paladin as they are now able to pump out more DPS, and whether or not I'm mistaken, I think they kinda needed it. Sheltron now becomes a cooldown effect instead of a one-time block, and we'll see how that works. I'm glad to see it change, regardless of how that happens. Next up we have Ninja. Ninja is looking cooler and cooler with each expansion. Its new ninjutsus look pretty sweet, and the new after image animation effect that you will see coming up I think looks pretty amazing. Its main utility change is that since Enmity generation has changed on tanks, Enmity swapping abilities have been removed, such as Shadewalker and Smokescreen. Since it is generally thought that whoever main tank is will now have no problem generating aggro, there is no longer use for such moves, and you supposedly will need that hotbar space for some new high-level skill sets and ninjutsus that have apparently been added. Ninja was a DPS that I've had my eyes on for this expansion, and it will most likely be the first DPS I level, and I'm really interested to see how it all works. I've been having a lot of fun with it recently, and I hope that it stays that way, but for now, I would like to move on to White Mage. Now, White Mage is getting a new instant heal ability, which with a focus on turning healers into a more purely healing focused role will definitely help with that, whether or not you agree with its reasoning. Lilies will now generate over time rather than proc with certain actions, which is a decent change, making it so that you can focus on certain skill sets rather than worrying about building them up. With the more instant cast, White Mage's plan to be made more mobile with less focus on cast times. In higher levels, if you meet the conditions, which weren't exactly laid out yet, you will get a Black Lily, which will activate a big DPS ability as presumably your level 80 ability. Honestly, this announcement that healers were going to take less of a DPS role was the most disappointing thing of this live letter brought me. I remain hopeful that will still be a balance of healing and DPS, but with the way White Mage is changing, I really do hope that they don't take on a huge burn of healing. This game is really good in my opinion because healers don't always have to heal, allowing for a more fun experience when picking up one of these jobs, but I pray that these actions don't have too much effect on the announcement. Rant aside, I'm going to move on to Scholar, the last of the healers. Not much has changed either. There's a new pet, the Seraph, which relies on the gauge and places Eos or Selene. It is known to cast more powerful healing spells. Scholar is also now more focused on healing spells instead of mostly relying on their shields and their pets, which I actually do think is a good thing, as I turned myself away from Scholar originally because it just felt like a dot machine while your pet did all the work. Eos and Selene have become very similar, and it was mentioned that you should pick the one that you like the look of better, meaning that the roles between the two are now almost indifferent and it's about the glamour instead. There's also apparently no need to worry about Scholar being too overpowered, so take that as you will. I'm not looking too forward to Scholar that much, as I personally never really had fun getting up to 70, but who knows, maybe the new changes will bring some new life into it. I have no real other opinions regarding it, so I'm just going to move on to its alter ego, the Summoner. Ruin 4 is now activated when a pet makes a certain unmentioned attack, meaning that you will be able to utilize it much more often. Eggy summon skills no longer have cast time, so you can now swap Eggies easier given the circumstances, which I mean that you're going to implement in the coming expansion. You can now summon a specific Suzaku-like Phoenix Eggy, which looks pretty cool, I'm not going to lie. Summoner once again, however, felt like to me that it's one of those classes where you just simply let your pets do a lot of the work, and I didn't really get into it until around level 60, and it kind of just didn't feel like playing it much after I maxed it out. So hopefully all I ask for is just more stuff to do and more stuff to experience, and I think that's honestly what it looks like, so we'll see. I'm sorry I just have to gloss over this one, but there's not much I have to say about it. However, I do have a fair to say about my next class, Machinist. Now, Machinist is said to have a near-complete overhaul, even going as far to say it feels like a brand new job. Addressing the complexity, it is now a good thing to accumulate heat gauge without worrying about overheat management. The more the better. And then what looks like a wildfire has undergone some change as well, acting on what your overheat used to do is what I'm guessing based on what the gauge looks like. There's a lot of new moves with focused around machinery rather than a singular gun, such as the poison cannon we saw at the beginning, the flamethrower, and what appears to be a drill cannon, and more. There's no sign of the turrets this time around, but I wouldn't be too quick to rule them out. The Gauss barrel has been completely removed, and with it the special ammunition, making you rely purely on your rotation and your ability to pump out numbers. There are many other changes to address that you will see when playing the job for yourself, such as the battery gauge that has been added, which when full can be used to summon what appears to be a Terminator, which is pretty dang cool. As someone who has actually been entertained with the way that Machinist has evolved over years, it finally feels right to me in a way. I haven't gotten around to playing it for sure, but it feels like this version is up to par with what it always should have been, and I couldn't be happier. I can't wait to jump into it, but without further ado, next up we have Dancer. Your core mechanic is based around doing steps. You will select a dance partner who will use certain abilities that activate your gauge. It will also grant certain buffs to the both of you. There are 2 steps involved, a standard with 3 steps and a technical with 4. While in your step, the only thing available is the rest of your step. Following the steps, buffs will become active. Certain dances are offensive, certain are support. Buffs that you apply to yourself during these steps are also applied to your dance partner. The range at which you attack is important, as some moves are better from a distance and some only work up close and personal. We also got a few screenshots of some new actions. Devilment, a standard AoE attack. En Avant, which is a dash move. Van Dance 1, a simple 150 potency attack which seems to be able to proc a different skill. Fountain, another basic attack which seems to be part of a combo. And Windmill, another AoE, but also with the ability to proc into another move. Dancer overall looks kinda interesting to me, and whether or not you feel like it should have been a DPS or not, I'm personally interested in anything new that comes out, including this, so I'll give it my try before I completely judge it, and I encourage you to do the same. However, I have to move on to what I've really been looking forward to, Dark Knight. story. I just really like that that's gone. Good riddance. A lot of the moves that we see Dark Knight pull off are amazing. Some new, mostly old. However, once again, its offensive stance, Dark Side, has been completely removed. But definitely looks like if you play Dark Knight, DPS will not be a problem. It looks like all the current Black Blood abilities such as Bloodspiller, Quietus, and Delirium are still in the game, as well as most of your basic moveset. The only thing that I can think of that I didn't see in here is Salted Earth. Whether or not that was decided to show or it was removed, either way, I'm not heartbroken. I've been maining this class for the past year and a half now, and I'm super excited to see what comes out of it next. And might I just say, the Living Shadow effect looks amazing. Each job seems to be getting some interesting new improvements and abilities, and the new jobs, Gunbreaker and Dancer, seem to have some interesting new mechanics to bring into the table. There will be another live letter on June 14th with more details on Shadowbringers, which I also plan to cover. But for now, it looks like this is the biggest drop of information that people have been waiting for since the last FanFest back in March, and certainly one of the last as we edge ever so closer to early access release on June 28th and a full release on July 2nd. In the meantime, let me know what job you'll be playing or looking forward to, and what specifically attracts you to it. Personally, as you now know, I'm attracted to the Dark Knight, Machinist, Ninja, and Astro, as those four really popped to me during this presentation as undergoing the changes that I really think needed to happen, and that most seemed appropriate. Did this live letter make you any more interested in the expansion? Because it definitely had that effect on me. But until next time, I'm Reki, you're not, and I'll see you in whatever it is I do next.